podcast is brought to you by the Association for Coaching, one of the world's leading international professional bodies, which is advancing coaching in business and society worldwide. I'm your host, Rosie Nice, executive coach, leadership development consultant, and founder of Magic Coaching. And in this new series, we'll be exploring how organisations can thrive and help their teams reach their full potential by creating a successful coaching culture. I'll be talking with leaders from a wide range of organisations, inviting them to share their personal, real-life experiences of embedding a coaching approach within their workplace, hearing their successes, the challenges they've faced, and the lessons they've learned along the way. Our aim is to offer practical insights and inspire you with the confidence to cultivate an environment where coaching becomes integral to organisational success, a culture of healthy, high performance. Hello and welcome to this episode in our series focusing on building a successful coaching culture. Today's guest is Jonathan Passmore, Henley Business School Professor, Senior Vice President at Ezra Coaching, Chartered Psychologist, Executive Master Coach, Coach Supervisor, Consultant, Author. The list goes on. So hello, Jonathan. Thank you so much for joining us today.
Rosie, lovely to connect with you this morning.
Oh, thank you so much. So can we start by asking you to tell us a little bit more about yourself and your background as an introduction for our listeners, please?
So I've been involved in the coaching industry since the 1990s. I have a background in organisational consulting, having worked for PricewaterhouseCoopers, IBM, OPM, and then more recently with Coach Hub and Ezra, and also have moved between consulting and the university sector, having worked at the University of East London and most recently Henley Business School, leading the coaching programs there, our executive coaching certificate, accredited by the Association for Coaching and the ICF and the EMCC, so triple accredited program, teams program, a supervision program, and really focusing on building an evidence-based approach in our research at Henley to try and support the ongoing development of our profession. And that's really what I'm curious about, interested in. How can we build the evidence to help us as coaches improve the impact of our work with organisations and individuals?
Perfect. Thank you. And that's exactly what we're going to focus on in this episode today. So I'm going to be asking you, Jonathan, particularly to share some of this academic work and explore what the research, the data, the evidence says about the benefits, the process, and perhaps the potential challenges of building a coaching culture in the workplace, and also to discuss what you think the future might hold. So we're here to talk particularly about building a successful coaching culture. So I'd love to start by asking what you feel that actually means. So how would you define a coaching culture?
Well, I think it's important to start with thinking about what is culture. And for me, culture is not the poster on the wall or what the annual report or the chief executive says that it is. It's the actual behaviours that employees each and every day display. It's the way we do things around here. And it's reflected in how is the car park organised? Can everybody park where they are, or is there special reserved spaces for the senior team? So that reflects, is this a collaborative endeavour, or is this a very hierarchical organisation? It's reflected in how the reception staff greet you. All of these aspects, the unspoken of, the hidden aspects, get played out and reflected and a part of that way we do things around here, the culture and organisation. And for me, a coaching culture is one that embodies coaching in the way that the organisation engages with all of its stakeholders, the way the organisation works collaboratively across the organisation. So how do I bring, for example, curiosity and an open mindset for learning and development and engagement to the next meeting that I'm stepping into? If I'm a leader and manager, how am I deploying a coaching style in the next one-to-one that I have? So that one-to-one isn't a directive engagement. There is a role for direction. There might be a role for affiliative styles and visionary styles, But the default style in a coaching culture is a coaching style. So using questions to help individuals to reflect and grow and develop. How do we then use coaching with other stakeholders in the wider network? And so coaching as a way of engaging through all stakeholders across the business is the way that business is done as the default style of engagement. And I think that that brings a longer term developmental focus. It brings a culture where people feel valued and appreciated for the unique human beings that they are. And I think it enables us in organizations to build collaborative systems that organizations in the past might have in the 1960s and 1970s been very bounded. The organization did everything. It made the spark plugs that went into the car. It made the whole car. Today, many organizations require on a sophisticated network of collaborations of franchise holders, of suppliers and partners, and even customers collaborating in that process. So how do we extend coaching into all of these relationships? So for me, a coaching culture embodies all of this with all of the stakeholders across the wider system in a way that is about growing development and a win-win based culture for us collectively, as well as for customers. And organizations are certainly aspiring to create these. And the talk of coaching culture, I sense, really in the last 2 or 3 years, has picked up markedly since COVID.
We're going to be talking a little bit later about how you feel the culture and coaching has changed over recent years. So I'm glad you mentioned that. And you're talking there really about the reality of people's daily experiences, not what the policy all the statements and the vision might be.
Absolutely right, Rosie. It is all about what actually happens, not what senior leaders pretend should be happening.
And sometimes there's a difference between the two, and sometimes they're closer.
My experience is too frequently there is a disconnect between the vision and hope and aspirations of the senior team and what actually happens on the ground. And so connecting these two is an important part of what I think leadership is about. And coaching can be a way of liberating and enabling employees.
Yeah. And in this series, we are talking to organisational leaders from a really wide variety of organisations and hearing very different experiences of trying to build their own view of what a coaching culture is. And I know that you've published many articles, many books on the topics of leadership and coaching. And I know that throughout your career, you've focused on making the research accessible so that people's practice can be informed by the evidence. So I'd love to explore what the data tells us about building a coaching culture in an organisation. So let's start with the benefits. What does the data tell us are the major benefits for organisations?
So here comes the bad news, Rosie. Actually, while quite a lot has been written since probably the early 2000s about coaching cultures, and there are half a dozen books on the topic, what we can say is that really there's very limited empirical research that provides us with hard evidence about coaching cultures and the impact that they have on employees or on organizational performance. And these things are difficult to do. Coaching research is difficult to do, and coaching culture is even harder to do because you need a larger sample size and you need to be evaluating the organization often across a longer period of time. So we could really say there is very little evidence that's there. People have espoused how fabulous coaching cultures are, really from a position of either they believe in coaching, and that's typically the view that was in the pre-2015 positions, and several people have described models and advocated that organizations should build them. What we can do is extrapolate really from the research that's happened 2015, 2018 onwards to then say if we're seeing these individual results, you could infer that coaching has a wider effect across the business. So let me talk about a couple of examples of these. So Superlu and Dobson have a lovely paper about reviewing the impact of executive coaching. We might say leadership coaching today. So what are the benefits for leaders of coaching? And then reviewing that literature, their broad conclusion was coaching can be a highly effective intervention to help individuals grow and develop in their responsibilities and roles as leaders. So if you multiply that up across the business, a better leader or a better leaders are likely to lead to better outcomes, one would hope, more emotionally intelligent, more reflective, better able to display the leadership competencies. Multiple studies have shown this, so we can then say that leads to a better leader, it probably leads to better leaders, and better leaders leads to better organizational outcomes. We haven't proved that link yet. A second study that we can look at in terms of coaching is something that I did in comparing coaching versus learning styles. So is a directive approach better for learning a new set of behaviors, or is a coaching style better? And clearly these are context dependent and they might be culturally dependent too. But in the study that I did, we compared in a large sample size two different types of interventions, a directive style and a coaching style. And what we found was the coaching style led to more effective and more efficient learning. So it took less time to learn the behaviors. Knowledge that the person acquired who had the coaching style, they had incorporated those behaviors more effectively into the way that they then worked compared to those people who had been taught through a directive style. So we can secondly say coaching's great for helping people to learn. So in an organizational context, if we want our employees to learn something, it's probable, again, depending on that cultural context and maybe the specific behavior required, the coaching is a good choice to help people to learn new behaviors. And the reason why it's particularly powerful is that it starts where the learner starts their journey. So it doesn't assume zero knowledge. So that's why it can contribute to quicker outcomes. And secondly, it's responsive to the individual, the knowledge they have. So we know from the wider psychological literature, the scaffolding knowledge, linking new knowledge to old knowledge, is more powerful than discounting all of the old knowledge and starting to build the tower block from the ground floor. So we get better quality outcomes more quickly through using a coaching style. And again, if you apply that at an individual level, good for one person, you apply that across an organization, good for the organization. And you might then think that if individuals have learned new behaviors, that's going to lead to better outcomes. We don't have the evidence to demonstrate that, mainly because that's really hard to demonstrate. I think there are only 4 studies that have been published over the last 30 years that have tried to go back after the end of coaching, after a few weeks or months, to then say, what is the impact, or is that behavioral change or measurement sustained over a period of time? And the evidence was that it was, but they're a tiny number of studies. So we clearly need to do more work around this. And then the third study I'm going to refer to is some work by colleagues at Sydney, O'Connor, and his ripple effect in coaching. And he demonstrated through a study that when somebody is coached, it doesn't only impact on them as an individual, that it has a ripple effect out across their team. And here at Ezra, we're just completing a similar study noting the positive impacts of coaching managers and how that has a positive impact on the team. So we have a large sample size, and the O'Connor paper was the first in this. So what we can conclude from that is coaching isn't something just done to the individual. It can have a wider organizational positive impact on team members and arguably to other peers, because of it encourages that engagement process, that open mindset, curiosity and learning that the individual who's being coached starts to adopt and then apply themselves. And qualitative research seems to also suggest this, that leaders who have been coached seem to adopt some of those behaviors and apply them to their teams. So we're seeing scatterings, little pieces of evidence, but what we're not able to conclude yet is in multiple organizational studies that a coaching culture leads to better outcomes. And there are problems with this, as I hinted earlier. One of those problems is what's better? What's a better outcome? Is it happier employees? Is it we're selling more widgets? Second problem with this is you might measure in 2025, but 2026 is different. So a classic example that I often give in this is you run a coaching program in 2019 for a hotel chain. They're enthused, they're highly motivated, and you can see at the end of 2019 how fabulous all of these employees are. You look at the organizational performance in 2019, and then you say you're going to compare it with 2020. And when you look at the figures for 2020, suddenly the organization's performance as a hotel chain has gone down. We know why that would be the case, of course. In that particular instance, COVID impacted. So there are economic and other circumstances that can skew your data that can be sometimes very difficult to separate out. And these are some of the reasons why research in this area of culture change is very hard to do. It's hard to do in coaching, but it's hard to do in any other intervention. Whatever you're trying, what are you measuring? And how do you contain some of these other variables that can be contaminating the effects?
Fascinating. And that's we're having discussions, as I said, with other organisational leaders. And one of the issues that people have been describing is, how do I measure the success? How do I demonstrate to my stakeholders that the evidence is there to show that this is an effective strategy? How do I define what good looks like? How do I define where I am on that journey?
Absolutely. And there are lots of case studies. So we can certainly look at individual case studies where organizations report themselves as to their perceptions of how the organization has been transformed, improved by using a more coaching-based style. Sometimes for organizations, that is, we've trained internal coaches. And I can think of examples that I can share during the course of our conversation today that illustrate at a qualitative level the stories that people are telling about the organization. It's harder to use some fixed metrics to measure that for all the reasons that I've been describing.
Yeah. So what I'm hearing is that the evidence shows that coaching can make better leaders, which has the knock-on effect, we would hope, of a better culture and more success. Enhanced learning, so people learn more quickly with a coaching style. There's a ripple effect out of when people are coached. So all of those good things has been demonstrated by some of the evidence. But you talked about yet, you used the word yet, we haven't yet been able to demonstrate as effectively. Is there work in the pipeline? How do you see that progressing going forward?
So certainly at Ezra, we are working with a whole group of large global organizations, helping them develop coaching cultures. And as part of those, we talk to organizations about what are the key metrics for them and seeking to provide that data. And I think as we move forward during the 2020s, the enablement of digital coaching, its scaled impact on organizations and its ability to collect data puts us in a unique position. When it was maybe a team of, let's just say at PwC, we were working face-to-face with clients, you might have a team of 25 people who are out coaching. You might be coaching 25 or 50 managers in an organization. You were a raindrop falling into a reservoir. The sort of scale of projects that we're now talking about from an Ezra perspective, we might be coaching 10,000 people in an organization. And as we move to enabling AI technologies, then you might be able to unleash the potential for everybody in an organization to have their coach. And then it's about pre and post completion, and also what sort of metrics the organization is able to collect to demonstrate the impact, comparing this group who have had coaching with maybe a control group of people who haven't had it yet. And you can then see, well, this is the power of creating a coaching culture in this part of our organization, because it's outperformed in sales by 10%. Our customer satisfaction ratings have improved by 25%. Our costs have reduced by 7%. You've got metrics to then go back on. And of course, if you've got a range of measures, it's far easier to demonstrate impact and then say, well, it's not just other external factors such as growth in the economy. There are other factors which we're able to then say, well, because of the range of improvements, coaching is having a positive organizational effect. So these studies are coming down the pipe, but they take a long time and they're complex to do.
Absolutely. And you've alluded to coaching being used in different ways. So we're talking about managers having coaches, perhaps external people coming in to coach them. We're also talking about managers integrating coaching into the way that they manage their people. There's different ways of using coaching skills. Can you tell us a little bit more about your thoughts around the difference, the similarities between receiving external coaching, but also using coaching as a way to manage your people?
Yeah, so for me, a coaching culture and the model that I've put forward, a lead model, is about bringing all of those elements together. So I talk about level number one, it's about leaders. So often leaders need an external voice, an external challenge, the independence of a professional coach. Now, different organizations might define leadership in different ways. For some, it might be their top 100 or 250 or 500. For others, they might say, this is our 10,000 people who have got responsibility for managing somebody else, are part of our leadership cadre. So you can approach that in different ways to provide a human coach to support those individuals and encouraging them to use coaching as their style as well as to improve their overall performance. So what we see is that people start to adopt the style, they deploy it themselves because they watch what their coach does. They learn from their coach in the way the coaches work with them. And of course, they're also working on a range of other attributes. They're trying to be more emotionally intelligent, more impactful, more systemic, more managing across the matrix, a range of different skills that whatever that individual wants to focus on. So the second stage then is about coaching for everybody in the organization. And I think that can be done through building internal coaching teams. And people can then pull down an internal coach. It can be quite cost effective to do that. So they might train 200 people, 2,000 people, depending on the scale of the organization, in coaching skills. And those internal coaches that are available as a reservoir to be drawn upon as and when they're needed, maybe through some process through HR, that they can have 6 coaching sessions during the course of a year to help them to continue to learn, develop, and improve. Maybe at key moments in their career trajectory as they're preparing for a move, maybe after a move, maybe after returning from maternity or paternity leave. Key moments that make a difference for that specific pool of employees. The second area where we can then be useful at applying coaching for everyone is leveraging AI. And in that sense, we really are only in the foothills of the deployment of AI. AI, at the moment, I would describe as being short, shallow, and sycophantic in the way that most AI tools work. The conversations are great if you want to have it at 2:00 in the morning. It's fantastic for I can't get this problem out of my head. What do I do? You switch on your smartphone, you have a quick text-based or voice-based conversation with a tool, gives you some thinking to be able to go, I've put that away. Now I can, tomorrow morning, action that little plan that I've thought about in that 5 or 10-minute brief call. And it tends to be quite behavioral action-based. But we know human coaching goes beyond that. The more skilled a coach is, the more they explore assumptions, values, systems, culture, context, and bring those alive. And we know that AI tools are not there yet. They may well progress in that direction, but they're still emergent. They're very much goal focused. So they have a role to play. And because of the cost and economies of scale, if you've got 100,000 employees, probably to have 100,000 employees accessing coaching may be, for many organizations, a cost that they cannot bear. AI might be, in 2026 or 27 or 28, the solution that they can deploy a coach on your phone anytime to help you think through a behavioral-based problem. That could be really useful. And certainly we've seen growing interest at Ezra with our Kai tool, that people are experimenting with it, piloting it, and we continue as generative AI continues to improve to develop that tool. So we're leaders in the field to make sure that as that technology improves, we can provide the best service. But it is still only in the foothills. Oh, I'm sure in a decade's time, when we look back on generative AI, I think, gosh, was that how they were working? Maybe in the same way that smartphones have improved really over the last 10 or 15 years. Now we use them for everything. I'm coming in on the tube to work this morning, and in my tube carriage, one person was reading a book and there were 8 people who were on their smartphone. It's become the way that we do things. If I'd gone back 15 years, there'd have been 3, 4, 5, 6 people with a book and probably no one looking at their phone. But technology continues to improve, and I expect generative AI to do exactly the same. And then the other areas that I think are important to focus on that shouldn't be neglected is trying to extend coaching beyond the boundaries of the organization. So thinking about how we can do that in the way that we work with our suppliers and our franchise holders and our customers. And so coaching becomes the way of when we sit down, we bring an open mindset, we bring curiosity into these conversations, we ask more questions and have fewer directive styles of ways of engaging. And that's not to say, as I mentioned earlier, that direction doesn't have a place. I frequently say that when the fire bell rings, so in a crisis situation, we don't want to say, okay, well, what are some of our options here? Actually, we'll want to tell people to leave the building. But the fire bell ring doesn't ring every day. It's an exception, and that for most conversations, 60, 70, 80% of the time, an encouragement for managers, an encouragement for contributors to be using that coaching style. And that's what each of those touch points, the internal, the AI, the external coaches, using it as well as employees and managers with our partners, is what brings a coaching culture alive for me.
And it's interesting that you say that. We hear from, certainly I run coach training programs. I go into organizations and help managers become coaches. And I hear people say, I see how I can use these skills in other contexts. I find myself using it with my clients. I find myself using coaching in customer service scenarios. And that's what you were talking about, is I guess it's that ripple effect of learning skills that are very transferable in building relationships, etc. So they're very transferable.
Absolutely, Rosie. And I think there has been in the last 20 years a sort of a claim that coaching's something special. It's the magic that we weave and that it's new. I don't hold that view. I think coaching is very old, and I think coaching is something that humans have been doing for thousands, tens of thousands of years, that we would walk across the savannah when we were hunter and gatherers, and the older, more experienced members of the tribe wouldn't say, there's the apple tree, go and pick the apples, you new hunter-gatherer with me, because the apple tree wouldn't be in the same place. Instead, in a dynamic environment that they were moving through, valley to valley, season to season, that environment was changing. So you needed to use a reflective style to focus on criteria in a dynamic environment. Coaching does that. And we know from what I was talking about earlier, it's a great learning technique. So I suspect from a human development point of view, we had conversation. We were probably using coaching as part of that wider repertoire of learning. And all we've done is we've rediscovered it in the last 20 or so years. And we're bringing it back, given the fact that we're living in more dynamic times. The world is less certain. The apple tree is no longer in the same place every day. It is moving, and we need our employees to have that flexibility, that growth mindset, to be able to change and adapt by looking at the criteria and then helping them to be empowered to make their decisions. No longer do we have a manager who's always there, who can tell them what to do, like a father or mother. Instead, people have to get on and solve their own problems. In organizations that have stripped out management, coaching's fabulous for empowering people. One of our great pioneers in coaching, John Whitmore, talked about 2 elements that he said were fundamental to coaching. Coaching's all about enhancing personal responsibility and self-awareness. And through those 2 aspects, people then become more choiceful. What's the right choice, or my organization or my tribe, in this situation, in this moment in time? And as we empower people, that plays into that autonomy that we want to unleash in modern organizations. And it enables people to be much more flexible than simply following the procedure guide of those procedures 1 to 86, follow these in these steps every time this happens. How many times have we phoned up call centers? I'm speaking to one last night. that drive you. Well, I'm sorry. No, we can't do this. And you rehearse your argument of this is the situation. And then they go back and repeat the script to you. Why can't somebody just empower them? And we'd love to see that change in all organizations that all of us deal with as customers. Coaching offers that potential to empower people, giving them the personal responsibility and helping them to be more self-aware. So they're not just reading a script, they're responding as authentic human beings to other authentic human beings, us, who are trying to resolve a problem.
Yeah. And one of my favourite Sir John Whitmore quotes is, "It can be harder to give up instructing than it is to learn to coach." It's harder for us to stop telling people what to do than to develop those coaching skills.
I don't recall that one, Rosa, but it is certainly a John type statement. And he was spot on with that. And that has been my experience too, of working with people that, because we have focused very much in organizations and in leadership with the idea of the hero leader, the great man. Here is the great man. He knows what the solutions are. And in 1920, that might have been a very effective way of leading organizations. But in 2020, it's no longer an effective way of leading organizations. The world is more complex and more chaotic. And instead, we need to empower our people to both have the authority and the confidence, and last of all, the capability to be able to make their own decisions and navigate through that. And coaching, maybe sometimes coaching ourselves through asking those questions, maybe as simple as the GROW model, or through having an AI coach or a human coach that equips them to be more effective, is part of what modern organizations should, actually, let me say, must do if they want to thrive in the 2020s and beyond.
Yeah. And you've talked about coaching as a practice, as a skill, having been around as long as people. You've also talked about leadership changing, and we talked about the last 20, 25 years. How have you seen the perception of coaching and leadership change, perhaps in this century, sort of 20, 25 years?
Back in the 1990s, when I first got involved with this, coaching wasn't a ubiquitous term. So the term mentoring and coaching were both used. Careers transition, careers advice was some of the terminology that was being used. So different words were being used to describe this. And now coaching has become so dominant as a intervention that it itself is being misused and is applied to things that I wouldn't consider to be coaching. And that's quite often the case, particularly in Asia, where someone will say, "Oh yes, I'm a great coach." And we have the leader of North Korea doing his coaching sessions, and really he's just telling people what to do. We know that that's not coaching. And the term has then been spread across in the wrong ways into some areas. The other thing that I think has happened really post 2020 is it's gone from a view probably in 2003 to maybe even 2010. There was a fad. This is a fad that's going to go away. But what we've seen is coaching has continued to grow, continue to professionalize, and the coaching capability, in my view, has continued to improve. So coaches are better at what they're doing. It's now more widely accepted and more widely used, to the point where we've moved away from the only people who had a coach were the senior leaders in an organization. Now, many leaders have coaches. And I think in the next 10 to 20 years, coaching will continue to grow and extend, and that technologies such as generative AI can help us in that process, enabling not just organizational leaders, not just organizational contributors in the biggest organizations of the McDonald's and Coca-Cola's who recognize the power of coaching, but in maybe smaller organizations who haven't typically used it. So the shopkeeper in Sudan who's trying to run their shop can switch on their smartphone and have a reflective coaching-based conversation with an AI tool that doesn't take all of their weekly earnings. Or a mum in Ethiopia who's looking for a little bit of life coaching about how they best support their newborn baby, doesn't want a directive approach, was like, what's right for me here in this context? Maybe in 3, 5, 10 years' time, the AI technologies will be able to help them too. So that's my vision. I think we have many, many human coaches, that AI can play a useful role supporting that, as long as we think about the environmental impact and we manage how the power and the water is being created for empowering AI. And I think it's also important to say that we think about the cultural and ethical aspects of the deployment of AI. So it's sensitive to ethical issues and sensitive to cultural contexts.
Interesting. And I sense there's a lot of sense of the potential of AI. There's fear about how AI may change the coaching profession. There's a lot of uncertainty, I guess, in the way that people are approaching it.
Absolutely. So in a recent paper, I think it was 2023 with Sandra Diller, we explored coaches' emotional states about the emergence of AI. And as you rightly articulate, fear was a typical response when we asked people a series of questions, then we exposed them to thinking about AI, then we asked them a similar set of questions about 20 minutes later, and anxiety levels have gone up as they thought about AI and the implications for the work that they did. There is no doubt that AI will continue to improve and it will grow and get better more quickly than human coaches grow and get better. So as humans, we need to be thinking about how we can leverage that technology and how we differentiate ourselves as humans from this technology. So my current series of research studies are exploring that question. What is it that's special about an embodied human coach in comparison to a generative AI that is the sum of all human experiences? Because all AI just captures it, scrapes all of this knowledge, human created knowledge, and then puts it together in a output based on a question, or maybe it is generating a question, but it is human gathered knowledge. But what it isn't, it's not embodied and it's not unique to the human being that's standing in front of us. So I could, on this podcast could be an AI, but it's not you, Rosie. It's not you and your lived experience. It's not you and your career wisdom. It's not you and your sense of humor. So these are things that we might, as humans, amplify in our work to build and deepen our relationship with clients, to make the human experience in coaching different from the AI experience. Both have a place, but there's something distinctive and unique. And I might draw a comparison between clothing and clothing manufacturer. I don't know about you, how many pieces, you don't need to answer this, but how many pieces of made to measure clothing do you have in your wardrobe? I suspect for most of us, it might be one or two, maybe two or three. We have special pieces of clothing, maybe a wedding dress or a suit that's made for a particular special event. But most of the time, and this is quite an anglicized response, we go to Marks and Spencer's and we buy our shirts and our suits off the peg because of the price comparison. Now, there are a group of people, maybe if you're King Charles or if you're Elon Musk or you're Donald Trump, you might have everything made to measure because you're a multimillionaire or a billionaire. Everything's made just for you. But for most of us, we have a little of those things which are special. The human coaching at times where either I'm an elite leader or it's a special critical moment in my career development. I have the human coaching. But for every day, that Tuesday morning meetings, I want to think through, what do I do this? I might well switch on my AI coach. So both can coexist. And it's about then the human coaches differentiating themselves to be made to measure experts to work with humans. That means driving the quality and focusing on the unique experience. And AI doing good enough coaching that's, yeah, it's not a perfect fit, but it's good enough.
And is that what you would see if you would wave your proverbial magic wand to see a future where it comes together really well? How would you describe that?
To tell you the truth, Rosie, if I had a magic wand, I'd probably wave my magic wand and make AI disappear. There is a belief that AI will be the salvation of humanity, and that may be true. But I also think that it may be a curse like Pandora's box that we have let out that brings with it more consequences than benefits. The future is to be decided. Sadly, I am a glass half empty person, so I tend to focus more on risks, and I can see how AI technologies when they get into the wrong hands for scams, but also from international actors who might want to do damage to democracies, do damage to other states. And in the long term, as we integrate robot technology with AI technology, it moves from being a little Hoover that's cleaning your living room to being something that is able to stack your dishwasher. And there are tools, they're not very good at the moment, of stacking your dishwasher. Humans are definitely better at that. But we will probably in a decade or 2 decades or 5 decades, our care homes will be full of robots who are providing support services for humans as we've integrated AI and robotic technologies. And the cost of those things will come down. But it comes with consequences for that. If I'm in a care home, yes, a robot might be a lower cost. But maybe I just want a hug from a human being. And so the cost might and an impact turn outweigh the benefits. And that's my worry. But I can't wave a magic wand. We live in a world where these things exist. So we need to then think about how do we deploy them in a way that minimizes those impacts. We think about always protecting humans, and we think about humans as being always over AI, being the master and never becoming the servant. And whether that's in coaching or in care services or in the multiplicity of other ways that AI is going to be deployed over the next 50 years. And of course, we are, as I said earlier, just in the foothills. There will be not just generative AI, we will soon be, will it be 6 months? Will it be 6 years? Artificial general intelligence. So this is not specialist knowledge where an AI tool focuses on a specific task, generating content, but it's going to be skilled at all tasks better than 99.999% of humans. There will be the occasional genius, the Einsteins, who will be smarter than the AI, but because it's gathered all human knowledge, it's going to be smarter than you, me, and most of us who are listening to this podcast. And we've got to work with it. We've got to try and create the safeguards. And then for us as coaches, we need to then leverage that technology to complement us, not replace us, because there is something unique and distinctive about human to human conversation, in my view.
Yeah. And I guess I hang on to the belief in our amazing ability to adapt and change. And I look at my oldest daughter who is 30 and my youngest son who is 23, and the huge differences in those 7 years of technology, particularly smartphones, and us older generation desperately keeping up. And I look at how much we've changed in those years and hang on to that in our ability to adapt to whatever the future holds for us.
I think that that's right. The reason why it's us on this podcast and not the dolphins or the cockroaches is we are the most adaptive species. We have learned to adapt and we will continue to learn to adapt. And it's also worth bearing in mind that AI is different than any other creation that has evolved over time. One, the pace of evolution of AI is quicker than other species, other living species. And secondly, it's harnessing all of human knowledge. So it too is going to learn itself and adapt more quickly than humans.
Fascinating. Well, let's cycle back to the coaching culture where we started.
Why don't we?
And you've talked a lot about your own experience of what a coaching culture means. You've talked about your experience of what the data does tell us, what it doesn't tell us yet. So if you were to give some advice to someone who was embarking on the path of building a coaching culture, what advice would you give them? What tips would you share based on your own experience and knowledge?
So I think building a coaching culture means thinking about all aspects of the business. It's thinking about the way we do things around here. It is, of course, exposing leaders to external coaches who bring the independence and the challenge that an internal coach is never able to give. It is about training people, leaders and managers, so coaching becomes the ubiquitous way of doing things around here. It's probably about building an internal coaching capability to be able to extend from the most senior leaders to access for a human coach to anybody at critical moments in their career journeys. And it probably also means thinking about and appropriately deploying AI coaching technologies for that 2:00 in the morning or the 10:00, 5 minutes before my meeting. I've got a one-to-one. What do I need to think through? That short, goal-focused call. So having all of that, and then extending coaching as the way that we do business outside of the boundaries of the organization, helping that to be a distributed model to coach suppliers, customers, stakeholders, franchise holders, all of that wider network that the success of the business is predicated on to enable a win-win outcome. So coaching truly is the way we do things around here with everybody who's within our system.
Well, that feels like a perfect place to finish our conversation. It's been so interesting. Thank you so much for sharing your thoughts and your experience with us today. I know people might be interested in connecting with you. You've talked about posting on LinkedIn. Are you happy for people to connect and follow?
Always happy for people to connect on LinkedIn, share their views about the podcast, share their views about coaching culture. That would be a delight, Rosie, and lovely to speak to you today.
Well, thank you so much. It's been an absolute pleasure.
Thank you for listening to another podcast by the Association for Coaching. For over 20 years, our purpose has been to inspire and champion coaching excellence, advance the coaching profession, and make a sustainable difference to individuals, organisations, and society. To find out more about the AC and our member benefits, follow us on LinkedIn or visit our webpage at associationforcoaching.com. Explore our digital learning hub and enjoy our extensive library of on-demand webinars, interviews, podcasts, and a portfolio of live events featuring thought leadership, tools, models, and the latest industry trends to help you develop your coaching expertise.